I still remember how still the house felt that morning. The kind of stillness that presses against your chest like grief does. Quiet, suffocating, inescapable. October had crept in with gray skies and colder winds, curling under the door frames, making the wood floors creak like ghosts pacing. I stood in the living room, hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea, watching as the funeral director's car pulled away with the last few mourners trailing behind. No one stayed long. Margaret had outlived most of her friends, and Richard, my husband of 12 years, had called from Zurich the night before with his usual sterile apology. I really can't make it, Elle. The board meeting got moved. Not even death could interrupt his corporate calendar. I was the one who dressed her body in her favorite silk blouse. I was the one who picked the roses she loved, pale blush with yellowed edges. And now, I was the one left in this house, still, haunted by her scent, a powdered mix of Chanel No. 5 and lavender hand cream. I climbed the staircase slowly, the railing cold under my fingers. Margaret's bedroom was exactly as she left it. Neat, orderly, always elegant. Her vanity stood by the window, its mirror framed in brass, the surface dotted with her cherished trinkets. I glanced at it and immediately felt something wrong. Her lipstick, the one she called her truth-teller, was gone. It had always sat in the center of the tray, a vintage red in a gold case, worn from years of use. She once told me, "I only wear this when I need to say something that might change everything." I thought it strange. Maybe someone took it? Maybe the hospice nurse had cleaned more thoroughly than I expected. Still, unease began threading through my ribs. Stayed in her room longer than I meant to. Night had already folded itself over the sky. While dusting the mirrored tray, I knocked over her perfume bottle, and as I bent down to pick it up, I saw the envelope, thin, yellowed, pressed flat beneath the wooden drawer liner. It had my name written across it in looping, fading ink. Eleanor. For a moment, I didn't breathe. My hands shook slightly as I pulled it free. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. She'd written this before she died. Inside was a single sheet, folded 3 times. Her handwriting was softer than I remembered, like the words had cost her something. He's not who you think he is. Protect yourself. Start with the storage unit. I stayed silent for too long. Don't make my mistake. That was all. No greeting. No explanation. Just those 6 lines. But they hit like thunder through my bones. My legs gave way and I sat hard on the edge of her bed. My hands clutched the letter as though it were the only solid thing in the room. I read it again. And again. Each time, the words cracked something deeper open inside me. What storage unit? What mistake? I stared into the mirror across from me. My face looked strange. Older. Hollowed. Like I hadn't truly looked at myself in years. I thought of Richard's. Cologne. His phone that he never let me touch. The distant way he kissed my cheek like a man closing a door. Margaret had always been protective of me, in her own quiet, measured way. She never said much, but when she did, she meant it. And now she was speaking from the grave. He's not who you think he is. A single tear slid down my cheek before I realized it had fallen. I folded the letter, held it to my chest, and whispered into the silence. "Margaret, what did you see?" The night held its breath. Somewhere in the house, the pipes groaned softly. Or maybe it was the floorboards, shifting with the weight of secrets I hadn't yet uncovered. The lipstick was gone. The letter was real. And now, so was the doubt. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the wind pull leaves from the trees, and wondered how much of my life had been a lie dressed in silk. They say falling in love is like slipping into warm water. You don't notice how deep you've gone until your feet can't touch the bottom anymore. I met Richard on a Thursday in May. The air in the gallery buzzed with too much wine and the smell of fresh paint. I had just graduated from art school, and my friend Liv had dragged me there, insisting I needed to network or at least flirt. I wore a silk scarf covered in paint stains and shoes I couldn't quite afford. I felt like a fraud in a room, full of curated confidence. And then he appeared, in a navy suit with a glass of Merlot and eyes that noticed too much. Richard, 10 years older. Every word from him felt intentional, like a brushstroke that already knew what the finished painting would look like. I didn't realize he was starting a portrait of me. "You have the kind of face painters chase for lifetimes," he said. I remember laughing. God, I was so starved for someone to see me. He told me he invested in young talent, that he loved art because it reminded him of truth, that I had something rare. I didn't question it. Back then, I still believed that attention equaled value. We were married 11 months later, under a canopy of crystal chandeliers and white peonies. My dress shimmered like moonlight on water, but I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Livy cried through the ceremony, though I wasn't sure if it was joy or something else. She pulled me aside that night and whispered, "You're not smiling with your eyes." "I'm tired," I told her. "I'm happy, I promise." I meant it. Or I wanted to. Margaret, his mother, had watched me through the whole affair with eyes that missed nothing. Her smile was always slightly too still. At our rehearsal dinner, she handed me a tiny velvet box. Inside was a family heirloom, a gold ring with a blood-red garnet. "For courage," she said softly. I didn't understand then. Richard and I moved into a glass-walled house on the edge of town. Sleek, modern, sterile. He said it was our sanctuary. At first, I believed him. I filled the guest bedroom with canvases and brushes, my sanctuary within his. But slowly, subtly, that space began to shrink. It started with small things. "I think you should focus on us for a while," he said when I mentioned applying for a residency. "Maybe wait on that painting. Let's redecorate instead," he murmured, tapping a budget sheet I never saw before or after. He didn't yell. He didn't forbid. He redirected me, the way you steer a child's hand away from something sharp. My friends called less. I answered less. There were dinner parties where I smiled too wide while he made little comments in front of colleagues that left bruises in invisible places. "She used to be an artist," he'd laugh. "Now she's my masterpiece." I laughed too. I was supposed to. One evening, I found a canvas I'd been working on torn and folded under a stack of old newspapers in the garage. I asked him about it. "Oh, darling," he said. I thought, it was garbage. "Honestly, you're so sensitive lately." So I stopped painting for a while. The scarf I once wore everywhere stayed in a drawer. The garnet ring, too heavy on my hand, sat on the vanity beside perfume I no longer used. I didn't notice I'd stopped listening to music, or how I avoided mirrors. People asked how I was doing. "I'm so lucky," I always said. "He takes care of everything." And he did. Every bill, every plan, every choice. I gave him my time, then my routines, and eventually, the pieces of myself I didn't think anyone would miss. My independence felt like currency I traded for love. A fair deal, I told myself. But late at night, when he was away on business, I would sometimes lie in our bed and imagine myself in oils again, color dripping down canvas, messy and alive. Instead, I wore pressed clothes and muted lipstick. I smiled for photographs that hung in cold silver frames on the stairwell. The woman in them looked polished, elegant. Gone. There was one photo I kept tucked in my bedside drawer. It was from the gallery the night we met. Me mid-laugh, scarf askew, hair a bit wild. Margaret had taken it, I later found out. I looked so unshaped in it, so utterly myself. The night before she died, Margaret asked me to brush her hair. Her voice was weak, but her eyes burned with something sharp. "You're not safe," she said under her breath. I thought she meant her illness. Now, I wonder if that was her first attempt to warn me. But by then, I wasn't sure I deserved saving. I don't remember the drive. The highway blurred into a ribbon of gray and sky, the kind of overcast day that made the world feel suspended, like even the weather didn't know how to react to what I was about to uncover. I held the key in my palm the entire time, its jagged edge digging crescents into my skin. The paper label attached was faint, the ink slightly smudged from age or maybe tears. Unit 47B. It was tucked behind a row of chain-link fences on the outskirts of town, in one of those self-storage facilities with peeling paint and motion sensor lights that flickered like guilty conscience. The air smelled like rust and wet cardboard. I parked beside a dented red hatchback, killed the engine, and just sat there, staring at the unit. I could still hear Margaret's voice, or rather, the memory of it, floating behind the words of her letter. He's not who you think he is. Protect yourself. Start with the storage unit. I hadn't told Richard I was going. He was still in Zurich, or at least that's what he claimed in the text he'd sent that morning. Big meetings today. Don't forget to water the plants. As if I were a housekeeper. As if nothing were unraveling. The padlock opened easily. Too easily. The moment I lifted the roll-up door, a breath of cold, stale air spilled out like a ghost exhaling. I hesitated in the threshold. The inside was meticulously arranged, not at all like the cluttered chaos one might expect. Shelves. Labeled boxes, a clothing rack on wheels, shrouded in a dry-cleaning bag. I stepped inside, and the door rattled closed behind me with a hollow slam. It felt like I had walked into a stranger's museum. The first thing I saw was a Tiffany box, robin's egg blue, pristine, unopened, with the ribbon still knotted, tight. Beneath it, 2 more just like it. Price tags intact, a gold bracelet, a silk scarf, then a red lingerie set still folded in tissue paper, the kind I would never wear, not even in my most daring youth. A scent clung to it faintly, orange blossom and musk. Not my perfume. Not mine. I reached for the envelopes next. They were stacked in an old shoebox, yellowed slightly at the corners. Handwritten, flowing script, feminine. The first one began, "My dearest R. Last night, you said we had to keep our love quiet, like a secret between souls. But I hate being a secret. I hate pretending you're not mine when you hold me like you'll never let go." I stopped reading. My throat tightened, a fist from the inside. My fingers trembled as I sifted through the rest. Dozens of letters, some dating back 5 years. I did the math without meaning to. 5 years ago was the year we honeymooned in Florence. 4 years ago, I miscarried. Alone. 3 years ago, I buried my father. And still, in every envelope, she called him hers. I sat down hard on a folded camping chair and let the box slide from my lap. The letters spilled across the concrete like fallen leaves. That's when I noticed the photos tucked between them. Candid shots. Him at a beach I'd never seen. Him holding hands with a brunette woman under a parasol. Her lipstick was smudged, and he looked like he was laughing. It was his real smile. The one I hadn't seen in years. The one he never gave to me anymore. There were rings too. Jewelry. One box had a note on it that read, "For your birthday. If she asks, it's from work." That was the year he gave me oven mitts. I couldn't breathe. Not properly. The air felt too thick, the walls too tight. My wedding ring suddenly burned on my finger. I yanked it off and dropped it into the nearest trash bag like it was radioactive. I wanted to scream, but there was no room for noise. Only shaking. Only silence. And then I saw it. Tucked at the back behind 2 dusty crates. Margaret's journal. The edges were frayed, her neat, slanted handwriting dancing across the leather cover. to the next woman who loses herself. I opened it slowly. Her voice poured out from the pages like, "The sea. He charmed me too, when I was young. I thought marrying into money meant safety, but it meant isolation. I watched him become his father. I watched Eleanor's light dim. I said nothing. I thought silence was protection. But I see now. It was betrayal." I swallowed, a sob. Margaret hadn't just seen me. She had known me. Known this trap I had mistaken for devotion. She had worn the same gilded cage, with different bars. I pressed my forehead against the concrete wall and wept. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the precision, the cruelty in how he timed it, how he could look me in the eyes on the worst days of my life, and still keep another woman warm in his arms. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. Of me. Of everything I had endured quietly in the name of love. But then, something fell from the journal. A folded bank statement. Strange numbers, foreign banks, large transfers, and one page was circled in red ink, Margaret's handwriting again. Check account 3429. It's in your name. I stared at it, barely able to register what I was seeing. He'd been funneling money through me. Laundering. It. Hiding it. Using my name to shelter his secrets. My devastation twisted, slowly, into something colder. Sharper. My chest stopped collapsing and instead expanded. Not with hope, but with clarity. This wasn't just personal. This was calculated. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't powerless. I stayed there until dusk. Reading. Remembering. Choosing. When I finally stepped outside, the sun was dipping low, and the light hit my skin like a baptism. I looked down at my hands, trembling, dirt-smudged, raw. I wasn't the same woman who walked in. I didn't leave a note. Not a goodbye, not a warning. Just silence. I packed one suitcase. Black leather, scuffed at the edges. The same one I used on our honeymoon to Florence. Back then, it carried silk nightgowns and perfume. Now, only essentials. Sweaters, Margaret's journal, the small velvet box that held my wedding ring. No longer on my finger. I tossed it inside without ceremony. The house felt too quiet as I moved through it. The ticking grandfather clock in the hallway. The faint hum of the refrigerator. All of it sounded like judgment. But I moved methodically, like someone handling evidence. Maybe I was. I left while Richard was at a conference in Chicago. At least that's where he said he'd be. I didn't check. I didn't care. The drive took 6 hours. The map circled, in Margaret's handwriting, led me to a cottage perched on a slope just beyond the sea. The path was overgrown, the gravel patch in front of it mossy and damp. The paint on the shutters peeled like sunburnt skin. The key, taped under a loose stone by the steps, clicked into place like it had been waiting for me all these years. Inside, everything smelled like salt and dust. Faded curtains danced in the breeze from a cracked window, and the floorboards groaned as I walked. Not in protest, but in welcome. There were mirrors in every room once. Ornate, vintage, some cracked down the center. Margaret had written about them in her journal. Richard liked to watch himself, not just in mirrors, but in me. My reactions, my silences, my shame. I took them down. Every single one. Carried them out into the overgrown garden and smashed them, one by one, behind the hydrangea bush. It was the most alive I had felt in years. I spent the first few days in silence. I made coffee every morning in a chipped blue mug I found in the cupboard. I painted, nothing coherent, just colors on canvas. I walked barefoot along the shoreline. letting the sand erase my footprints as if I'd never been there. I read Margaret's journal every night, curled up on the old couch beneath a patchwork blanket. Her voice was different there, less sharp, more human. She had suffered, maybe even more than me. He controlled the thermostat, my diet, my friends. He said he was protecting me. From what? Myself? She had lived in this cottage after their divorce. Briefly, secretly. I could picture her here, sitting where I now sat, staring out the same window. It was like she'd left me a trail. And for the first time, I was following something that felt mine. Her name was Jo. I met her the day a storm rolled in and blew one of the shutters clean off. I'd gone into town for supplies, and the woman at the hardware store, wiry gray, braid, rolled up sleeves, offered to come help when I looked lost staring at brackets and nails. She was strong, capable, quiet. The kind of woman who didn't look at me like I was broken. We drank tea after she fixed the shutter. She told me about her workshop, the boat she was building, her dog who barked at everything but bit no one. I told her nothing. At first, just that I was taking time. She nodded, like she understood what that meant. Over time, we spoke more. I told her about Margaret, a little. I mentioned Richard, even less. And one day, when I opened up about the bank account, Jo sat back, eyes sharp. "You should check into that," she said, quietly. With her help, I filed a legal inquiry. She knew someone in town who worked in finance, a retired woman named Karen, who still handled discrete cases. I used Margaret's journal and the circled numbers on the statement as a starting point. It didn't take long. The account was real. So was the fraud. Richard had been funneling money for years, through shell companies, through my name. My name. The debts, the taxes, the liability, all tied to me. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a slow-motion murder of my identity. And he thought I'd never notice. One night, I sat on the cottage floor with my wedding ring in one hand and a photograph in the other. Our wedding day, glossy and posed. My smile in that photo looked real. But it wasn't mine anymore. I walked out to the edge of the cliff, where the sea broke violently against the rocks, and I threw the ring as far as I could. I didn't watch it fall. I just closed my eyes and let the wind remind me. I was still here. I filed the claim on a Thursday, quietly. No confrontation. Just a stack of evidence slipped into a manila folder and handed to a woman named Karen in a tidy back office with potted ferns and the smell of old paper. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. The folder held everything. Printouts from the bank statements, copies of Margaret's notes, photos of the storage unit where Richard had hidden everything he couldn't burn, old ledgers, receipts, even a safe with our wedding contract, amended with fraudulent signatures. It had taken weeks to piece it all together. But I did. I walked out of that office into the briny sea air, the fog curling around me like a shawl. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like reclamation. I started painting again in earnest after that. It began with hands. Just hands. Reaching. Clawing, fading. Then arms, torsos, fragments. My brush refused to paint a face. Instead, I painted the women as shadows, veils, whispers. I called them the disappeared woman. Each one different. Each one unnamed. I painted in the mornings, barefoot and in silence. The only soundtrack the gulls and the creaking of the old. Wood beams. Paint streaked my forearms. My curls were a mess. I forgot to eat sometimes. But I was alive. Jo built me new canvases from salvaged wood. She didn't ask what they were for. She just brought them with quiet reverence, like offerings. Posted a few photos online, barely edited, raw in the dim light of the cottage. And the response came like a tide breaking. Shares, messages, comments from women I didn't know, saying thank you, saying this is me, saying I thought I was invisible. An old gallery friend reached out. "Are you showing again?" The voice shook when I replied, "Yes, finally." The opening was small but full, held in a coastal gallery with walls the color of bone and spotlights that made everything seem holy. The paintings hung like ghosts, and I stood among them, no longer a ghost myself. I wore a black dress that had hung untouched in the back of my closet for years. Simple, elegant, no jewelry, no makeup, just me. I didn't look in any mirrors. I didn't need to. Jo came. She stood in the back with her hands in her coat pockets, watching quietly as people whispered in front of the canvases. She winked at me once, and I felt something warm settle in my chest. Near the end of the night, my phone buzzed. A private message. "Your paintings. I know this style. I've seen it before, at Richard's house. My name is Sophia. I need to talk to you, please." I stared at the message until the gallery lights dimmed. Sophia was younger, late 20s maybe. Thin wrists, tired eyes, soft-spoken. We met at a diner outside the city, one with linoleum floors and chipped mugs. She ordered tea. I ordered nothing, m'do. "Sorry," she said first. "I didn't know about you. Not really. Not until after he left." "Pregnant," she whispered. "He ghosted me. I found your name on some old letterhead. Then I saw your paintings. I recognized the colors. He always kept a few of yours in his study. Told me he found them at some estate sale." A laugh escaped me. Sharp. Bitter. "Of course he did." Sophia pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. Voice recordings, emails, photos of notebooks, passwords, security questions. He had patterns, she said. A cycle. He seduced, used, and erased. There were at least 4 other women over the years, she said. 2 of them had abortions. 1 disappeared to another country. She looked at me with eyes that mirrored my own from years ago. "I don't want to be a ghost," she whispered. "I want to survive this." That night, back in the cottage, I lit a candle and sat with Margaret's journal in my lap. The pages were soft, nearly translucent in places. I found the entry I was looking for. I tried to leave, once, before the divorce. His father ruined me. Took my savings, my license, my dignity. I stayed silent so I wouldn't lose everything. Else, the handwriting wavered there, stopped. Then, my silence bought me survival, but not freedom. I stared at the words until they blurred. Margaret had chosen silence. I was choosing voice. The next morning, I pulled out the red velvet box. My wedding ring still sat inside. Tarnished now, a little scratched. I painted it into my newest canvas. Not as a ring, but as a halo around the headless figure of a woman in motion. Unnamed, defiant. I titled the piece, Inheritance. The phone rang 3 days later. Karen's voice was crisp. "Eleanor, we're moving forward. You've got a strong case. With the new materials from the girl, it's airtight." A pause. "But I should warn you. Richard's aware now. He's retained counsel." I looked, out the window. The sea was roaring. "Let him come," I said. "I'm not afraid anymore." The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature. In silence. It was the kind of silence that holds breath hostage, that makes fabric sound like thunder when you shift your skirt, that makes paper seem too loud. I had rehearsed this moment in dreams, but reality felt strangely still. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like ceremony, like closure dressed in legal terminology and worn oak furniture. I sat on the left, behind a table stacked with exhibits that weren't just numbers or statements or photographs. They were memories I had excavated with trembling hands. Receipts of deceit. Journal entries of a woman long gone. Passwords and voice recordings and photos of faces I would never forget. Faceless in art, but etched in memory. Across from me sat Richard. It was jarring to see him like that. Not angry, not defensive, just small. The man who once orchestrated rooms with charm and curated lies with precision now looked like a story being unspooled. I studied him, not with hatred, but with a distant sort of curiosity, like watching a thunderstorm through thick glass. His suit was too tight across the shoulders, his hands restless. His eyes never once met mine. The judge's voice became rhythm, steady, methodical, void of pity. Fraud, emotional abuse, coerced signatures, hidden bank accounts. The evidence was presented like a funeral dirge. Each document called forth a different version of me. The naive girl who signed forms in trust. The woman who cried quietly at 2 a.m. as Richard locked himself in his office. The artist who forgot her own name for a man's ambition. Then came her testimony. I hadn't seen the mistress, her name was Anna, since the day we met at the cafe. She was softer now, heavier with pregnancy, but there was an unmistakable resolve in her voice. I watched her as she spoke, not about love, but about manipulation, about promises Richard made and patterns he repeated. She was not my enemy. She was my echo. She handed the court recordings, his voice saying things that turned my stomach into knots. No one will believe you. I own you. She's just a painter who cries too much. Each word scraped against my spine. Margaret's journal came last. I hadn't intended to use it. It felt sacred, private. But when I found the final pages, the ones where she wrote about trying to leave Richard's father, about her assets disappearing overnight, her letters returned unopened, I knew this wasn't just about me. It was about legacy, about generational silence, carefully taught and cruelly preserved. The judge read aloud excerpts. I didn't cry. I held my breath and listened to Margaret's ghost speak the words she never said out loud. When the verdict came, I didn't exhale. Not yet. Richard was found liable. He lost most of what he built. Not because of me, but because of himself. The house, the investments, the carefully tailored persona unraveled like a loose hem finally pulled free. I watched his face as the judgment was read, and for the first time, I saw something resembling realization. Not remorse, just shock. As if the consequences were unexpected. As we left the courtroom, I didn't stop or slow down. But as I passed him, a moment frozen like old paint on canvas, he whispered my name. Eleanor. I didn't respond, not because I didn't hear him, but because I had nothing left to say. I returned to the house one last time, not because I missed it, but because I needed to see it empty. I needed to know that it no longer held me, that its walls didn't echo my name with his voice. The floors were bare, the artwork removed, the smell of his cologne replaced by a sterile kind of absence. In the bedroom, I opened the drawer where I used to keep my jewelry, the expensive kind he gifted with apologies and the handmade pieces I once wore in college. At the bottom of the bowl was the wedding ring, the diamond dulled by time and dust. I remember the day he placed it on my finger, how heavy it felt, how my hand never quite adjusted. I picked it up and held it to the light. It no longer shimmered. I placed it in a small envelope, along with a single sheet of paper, a copy of Margaret's final letter, the one addressed to her younger self. It read more like a poem than a plea. I had copied it by hand, no note, no explanation, I mailed it to Richard's office address. Closure, I've learned, doesn't come with grand gestures. It comes in the quiet decision to end a sentence. Now I live by the sea, a modest cottage with chipped blue shutters and floorboards that creak in rhythm with the wind. It smells like salt and turpentine. My studio is filled with unfinished canvases and the kind of light that softens everything it touches. I paint women now, always women. Fragmented, faceless, whole in their brokenness. My last series sold out online. They call it haunting, mesmerizing, feminist grief in acrylic. But to me, it's just truth. Truth I couldn't say out loud, so I painted it instead. On the edge of my easel sits a tube of red lipstick. I don't wear it often, just on days when I need reminding. It's not war paint. It's not seduction. It's simply mine. I once wrote a letter to Richard. A real one, years ago, during one of our many silences. I never sent it. It ended with, "One day I'll walk away so quietly, you'll swear I was never here, but you'll feel me in every shadow you cast." Now I understand what I meant. I don't need to be remembered. I just need to be free.